All right. Welcome to another narration of mine. Settle in for a moment. This is where the voices I carry meet the version of the truth most people avoid, and where the things we uncover tend to stay with us long after the story ends. Only the brave souls and the fearless ones stay until the end. The forest made a copy of me. It wants the original dead. But that's not where the story begins. It begins with a pull, soft, insistent, like fingers curling around the edges of my curiosity and tugging me deeper into the green I've always wandered toward, forests, the way some people wander toward churches. They're the only places where the noise in my head settles into something gentle. Under the trees, the world feels older than lies, older than hunger, older than the wounds I carry in my chest. For months, there had been one particular stretch of woods calling to me, the kind people mention with a brief shrug and a quick change of subject. Secluded, they'd say. Not many trails, no real campsites, just endless pines, leaning together like conspirators, whispering secrets. I'd look at satellite images, sometimes, an ocean of green, a wrinkle of hills, a place that seemed to breathe on its own. I told myself it would be beautiful, peaceful. I didn't realize peace has a price. So Friday morning, before the sun had fully lifted itself over the horizon, I tossed my gear into the back seat and drove until the road thinned into gravel, and the gravel thinned into mud. The parking lot was barely more than a patch of packed earth surrounded by ferns that swayed lightly in the cold morning breeze. There was a small path, thin as a scar, slipping between the trees. I stepped onto it, and the forest floor welcomed me like a throat swallowing. Dirt, moss, and pine needles pressed together under my boots. The ground gave slightly with each step, as if memorizing the shape of my weight, the rhythm of my walk. The deeper I went, the quieter the world became. Even the birds sounded hesitant, their chirps thin and uncertain, a kind of warning wrapped in melody. Tall pines rose in rows like pillars in a cathedral built for something holy or something hungry. Their tops disappeared into a drifting haze that made the air taste like sap and stillness. Hours passed in a soft green blur. The forest felt endless, folding in on itself, swallowing distance. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something moving, branches shifting though no wind blew, shadows bending, even when the sun stayed steady overhead. When I finally pitched my tent that evening, clouds gathered so quickly, it looked as though the sky had been painted over in the span of a breath. The wind died. The air thickened. Then the first raindrop struck my cheek, heavy, cold, almost metallic. By the time I crawled into my tent, the storm had begun. In earnest, rain hammered the canvas like fists, like something impatient trying to get in. The ground beneath me softened into a thin layer of mud that clung to my sleeping bag and made the air smell like wet stone and decaying leaves. I lay there, watching the weak glow of the lantern tremble. My eyelids grew heavy. Sleep tugged at me. But just as I drifted into that blurry space between thought and dream, a sound rose outside my tent. Not an animal, not the groan of bending branches, something else. A voice, thick, wet, broken, like someone drowning mid-sentence. My skin prickled. I grabbed my flashlight, flicked it on. The beam cut through the tent fabric in a pale, trembling sheet of light. No shadow, no silhouette. Nothing standing just beyond the nylon. Still, I unzipped the flap and leaned out. Rain soaked my hair instantly. Fog clung low to the ground. The forest stood there in its shrillant, stoic way, watching, listening, waiting. But nothing moved. Nothing spoke. And yet, as I sealed myself back inside, a strange certainty coiled in my gut. The forest had noticed me, and it wasn't done speaking. By morning, the storm hadn't passed. It had only grown teeth. The sky hung low and bruised, sagging under the weight of rain that fell in curtains, not droplets, thick and endless, like the forest was trying to wash something away, something it didn't want to be seen. I opened the tent and was met with a wall of water and wind. The trees groaned above, their long arms swaying like they were reaching for each other, or for me. I packed in silence, each item slipping into my bag with wet, squelching sounds. My fingers felt numb, not just from the cold, but from something else, something more ancient. There was no sound, but the steady roar of rain and the deep, distant hush of something moving far beneath the surface of things. The trail I had followed was gone, completely swallowed by mud and moss and shifting roots that hadn't been there the day before. The forest had rearranged its bones. I picked a direction and started walking. It wasn't logic guiding me. It wasn't memory. It was desperation, a breathless kind of panic that made me keep my eyes forward, never looking too long into the spaces between the trees, because in those spaces, things watched. The deeper I walked, the stranger the woods became. The bark on the trees seemed to pulse, slow and steady, like lungs inhaling and exhaling. Some of the trunks were split wide open, their insides hollow and dark, as though something had chewed its way out, or in. I passed a fallen log that had been stripped of bark completely, revealing pale wood carved with dozens of lines, too deliberate to be random symbols etched deep, like the forest was keeping records of every soul that wandered into its ribs. I didn't stop to study them, because the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was expectant. The air felt tight around my throat. Even the rain had started falling quieter, softer, as if it didn't want to interrupt whatever was about to happen. Then came the flash. Lightning, sudden and sharp, tore across the sky like a wound opening in heaven. For one impossible second, everything turned white. When the light faded, I was no longer alone. A shape stood several paces ahead. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. The ground around it was bubbling like stew over fire. The mud churned in unnatural patterns, spiraling around the thing's feet. And then I saw it start to build. Not rise, not appear. Build. From the bubbling filth, shapes began to form, slowly, wetly. First, a pair of legs, long and bent slightly at the knees. Then a torso, narrow and shivering. Arms unfolded next, thin and long, with too many joints bending in ways that made my skin crawl. And then the head began to take shape. Hair spilled down the back, tangled and slick. The face remained featureless for several heartbeats, like clay waiting for a sculptor's hand. Another flash of lightning. The mud rippled, and then eyes. Blue. Familiar. My blue. I stepped back. Skin stretched across the bones, like paint drying over a frame. Fingernails erupted from fingertips, too clean, too white. A nose formed, ears, a mouth. The lips opened with a squelch, and thick globs of mud poured out onto the forest floor with a sound like someone choking. Then came the teeth, perfect replicas of mine, set in a grin that kept growing, kept widening, until it was something inhuman, something too proud of the skin it had stolen. Its eyes met mine, and I felt seen, not in the way a person sees another person, but in the way a predator sees prey after hours of silent stalking, in the way a hunter looks when it finally corners something it's been craving. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. My muscles locked. My thoughts stuttered. And then it spoke. Not loud, not angry. It said one thing. "Hi, Sally." My name, wet and broken, poured from its mouth like rot. And just like that, my body woke up. I ran. I didn't care what direction, didn't care if I was heading deeper. I ran like the ground was on fire, and my lungs were full of smoke. Branches whipped at my face. Thorns scraped my arms. Rain flew into my eyes and blurred the world into streaks of green and gray. Behind me, I heard it. Sloshing steps, heavy breath, the sound of something too new to its body, too excited by its purpose. Then a shriek, high and jagged, ripped through the trees. It was my voice, not just similar, exactly mine. It screamed my terror back at me, and it was closer. I tripped, went down hard, my hands sinking deep into the mud. Something grabbed my wrist, wet, tight. ice cold. I didn't look. I didn't want to see my own hand holding me down, but I felt it drag me backward. I felt it climb onto my back. Its fingers slithered around my neck, and I could smell it. Earth, rain, decay, like something buried shallow for too long. My fingers scraped the forest floor, searching. Then, stone. Smooth. Sharp. Salvation. I swung it backward with every ounce of strength I had. It struck something solid. The weight on my back shifted. The creature shrieked. Not in pain. In anger. In offense. Like it hadn't expected me to fight. I turned, saw the mud bleeding from its head. Thick and dark, bubbling like tar. And I ran. Again. Deeper into the belly of the woods, until I found a rock opening under a low hill, barely large enough to crawl into. But I did. And now I'm here, writing this, breathing like each breath is my last. Outside, something moves through the trees, slow and deliberate. The rain has stopped. The silence is back. But different this time. It's not waiting. It's listening. And I hear it again. That voice. My voice. Sally. It's getting closer. The shelter I'd found was barely a hollow, just a jagged slit in the hillside where stone had cracked open long ago, leaving a cramped space that felt more like a mouth than a hiding place. The roof hung low enough that I had to crouch, my spine curled tight, my breath ghosting in front of me in thin, frantic clouds. Outside, the forest had grown unnaturally still. The wind had died. The rain had fled. Even the drip of water from leaves had gone silent, as if every drop had been caught mid-fall and held there by an unseen hand. Silence shouldn't have weight, but this one did. It pressed against the opening of the hollow like a thick, suffocating fog. Heavy, expectant, hungry. I stayed as still as I could, my pulse hammering behind my teeth. Mud clung to my clothes, to my hair, to the inside of my throat, where fear had settled like a fist. Then I heard it. A wet shuffle. Then another. Slow, deliberate steps that didn't sound like walking so much as sliding, as if something was dragging itself across the forest floor and savoring every inch. The creature, the thing wearing my shape, didn't call my name this time. It made small noises, soft, sticky sounds like someone pushing fingers into soaked earth. Exploring, testing, trying to feel where I had gone. The hollow grew colder. Each inhale stung my lungs. I pushed myself deeper, letting the darkness wrap around me, even though it felt like sliding into the mouth of something sleeping. Moss lined the interior walls, slick and cold. And when I pressed my back against them, I could feel vibrations, tiny tremors, as if something deep beneath the earth was shifting in its sleep. I didn't want to imagine what that meant. I didn't want to think about whether the forest made only one copy, or many. Outside, twigs snapped. Softly, too softly. The steps grew closer, but not directly toward the hollow. They paced, wandered in small circles, as though the creature was studying the air, tasting it, trying to decide which direction my scent had fled. A sound rose from its throat, quiet, wet, almost puzzled. And then, faint breathing, not like mine, like a child's imitation of it, just slightly too fast, slightly too shallow, slightly too eager. I closed my eyes, not because it helped, but because I couldn't stand the thought of seeing my own face crawl past the mouth of the hollow minutes, or hours, I couldn't tell, past with the creature's presence drifting nearer, then farther, then nearer again. Its movements felt wrong, not guided by steps or muscle, but by something instinctive, something animal. Then came the whisper, not from outside the hollow, from behind me. A thin, trembling whisper that slid across the back of my neck like a fingertip of ice. "Where did you go?" I jerked forward, my hand smacking the stone wall. My fingers trembled against the cold surface. No space behind me. Nothing could be there. I'd backed myself into the deepest crevice already. There was no room for breath, let alone something else. But the whisper came again, higher this time, cracking slightly, like it had been stitched together from broken pieces of my own voice. "Don't hide." I turned my head, slow as a dying animal. The back of the hollow was nothing but stone and damp moss. But the moss twitched, barely, as though responding to the sound of its own heartbeat. No, not heartbeat. Breathing. Breathing that matched mine perfectly, only a half second behind, like a delayed echo, a mimicry. And then the moss shifted more deliberately. A ripple, a pulse. The wall itself seemed to inhale. I scrambled forward, scraping my palms raw as I clawed toward the mouth of the hollow. I didn't care if the creature outside was waiting. I didn't care if stepping out meant dying, because something else was waking up inside the hill, with me. Just as I reached the opening, a shape passed by, human in outline, but not human in movement. The creature wearing my skin slid through the trees, head tilted, hair plastered to its face like wet seaweed. Its hands were coated in mud up to the wrists, dripping steadily onto the ground in thick, dark clumps that sizzled when they touched roots. It paused, turned slowly, its face lifted, sniffing the air like a dog catching a familiar scent. My breath froze. Then it smiled, wide, sharp, stretching to the edges of its cheeks until the skin thinned to near tearing. Its eyes flicked toward the hollow. But just then, something inside the hill exhaled, a deep, rumbling breath that shook the ground beneath me, a breath nothing human could make. And the creature jerked backward, startled, its grin flickering as if something had overridden its instinct. It hesitated, looked toward the hollow, then toward the forest, then back again. Something had frightened it. Whatever lived in the stone behind me was enough to unsettle the thing made from mud and imitation. Without a sound, it slunk away, melting into the trees like a shadow dissolving in fog, but not fleeing, just repositioning, circling. It wasn't done, not even close. I pressed my palm against the trembling stone behind me. The moss pulsed once more, slow, steady, like a warning, or a call. I didn't know which one terrified me more. The creature was gone, swallowed by the dripping columns of trees. But the hill behind me hadn't finished breathing. I pressed myself against the mouth of the hollow, unsure whether fleeing into the open would save me or doom me faster. The air tasted different now, thicker, metallic, as if whatever stirred inside the stone had scraped its tongue along the walls and changed the atmosphere with its hunger. My heartbeat felt too loud, too revealing. Every thud echoed up my throat, like a beacon calling to anything out there that knew how to listen. And something was listening, not the thing that wore my skin. Something older, something that didn't bother pretending to be anything human at all. The moss on the stone wall behind me trembled again, a shiver running through it like a ripple across a pond. But ripples don't whisper. This did. A faint murmur, so low it felt more sensed than heard, seeped through the rock and brushed the edge of my ear. I couldn't understand the words. If they were words at all, they sounded like roots grinding against bone, like soil shifting in a grave long after the coffin rots away. The forest wasn't just alive, it was communicating, and it had learned the shape of my fear. I edged forward on my hands and knees, careful, slow. The moment my palm touched the leaf-strewn ground outside the hollow, the forest reacted. A soft creak traveled through the trees, like dozens of trunks bending closer in unison, their weight groaning through the wood. The canopy above dimmed as branches knit themselves tighter, locking out what little light dared remain. I was being closed in, not trapped yet, but framed. I scanned the clearing. The creature wasn't visible, but its absence didn't comfort me. Its silence was worse, because silence meant it was thinking, and thinking meant it was learning, just like the forest. I crept from the hollow, keeping low, each breath a careful thread of air. The earth squelched beneath my boots, but even the mud felt wrong beneath me, too warm, too soft, as if something underneath it shifted with my steps. A tree to my left shuddered, not from wind, from movement. The bark rippled, bulging outward in a slow, pulsing swell. Then another tree, then another, each trunk distorting subtly, like something inside the wood was stretching, pushing, trying to press its face to the surface so it could watch me. The forest knew I was out. It knew I'd left the hollow. It approved. A branch snapped behind me, not a normal snap. This one was sharp and clean, like a neck breaking in a quiet room. I spun around, breath choking in my throat. Nothing. Only trees standing too straight, their branches sagging with wet needles that dripped red-tinted rainwater. No, not rainwater. Sap. Dark, thick sap that looked almost like old blood. The trees were bleeding, and the forest wanted me to see it. A voice rose through the stillness. Not the creature's voice, not mine. Something else. Low, dragging, gurgled like it spoke through a throat filled with roots. A moan. Long, deep, close. The ground vibrated beneath my feet. A slow, steady thrum that felt disturbingly like a heartbeat radiating upward from the buried heart of the woods. I crouched behind a fallen trunk slick with rain and tried to steady my breath. Then, footsteps. Soft. Deliberate. Coming from somewhere ahead, I peered over the log. Nothing but mist curling between the trees. Another step. And another. Slow, rhythmic. As if the forest was matching the cadence of my own footsteps from earlier in the day. A mimicry. A rehearsal. I ducked lower. Something brushed past the trunk. Something pale and slender, gliding like it barely disturbed the air. A hand. My hand. The creature circled me, its steps synchronized to my pulse. Each time my heart thudded, it took another step. Every beat brought it closer. Every second shaved down the space between us. It didn't speak my name this time. It didn't need to. Because suddenly, the forest spoke for it. A dozen whispers rose from the earth. Voices woven from mud and stone. Hollow echoes repeating a single phrase in a warped chorus. Come back. The creature lunged. I bolted. My legs tore through thorns, through underbrush, through mud that clung like hands. Branches whipped across my face, drawing thin lines of burning sting. My chest felt like it was splitting open from panic. Behind me, the sound of sloshing footsteps erupted. A frenzy of movement, wet and fast, like something newly born and starving. The trees began to shift around me, trunks bending just enough to narrow the path, branches reaching lower to snag at my hair and pack. I realized, with raw, terrifying clarity, the forest wasn't trying to stop the creature. It was funneling me toward it, guiding me, delivering me. I stumbled into a clearing I hadn't seen before, a place where the trees arched overhead in a half circle, their tops forming something that resembled ribs. A natural cage, or an altar. The mud there was different, smoother, darker, swirling in spiral patterns, like something beneath it was stirring, waiting to surface. The forest wanted me here. This was where it had planned to end me. I spun around, and the creature stepped into the clearing, its face half melted from the earlier blow, a mix of pale skin and dripping earth. It grinned. It always grinned, with lips pulled too wide, revealing too many teeth. Teeth that were mine, replicated perfectly, but wrong in their eagerness. Its voice spilled out, broken and thick. Almost. My knees nearly buckled. Behind me, the mud began to bubble. Something else rising. Something bigger. Something the creature had merely been the herald for. And I was trapped between the thing that wore my face and the thing that wanted my soul. The clearing felt alive in a way no place should ever feel. The air trembled as if threaded with nerves. The ground swelled and sank in shallow breaths, and the trees leaned inward, not just bending, but listening. Every trunk angled subtly toward me, as though the forest itself was a single creature, and I was lodged inside its throat. Behind me, the mud heaved again, not rising the way the doppelganger had risen. No, this was deeper, older. The same way thunder doesn't sound like noise, but like the sky remembering it can die. The creature wearing my shape stepped closer. Its legs shook with each movement, as if its bones hadn't quite learned how to exist inside borrowed anatomy. The skin on its arms had begun to slide, revealing slick layers beneath. Threads of soil and decayed leaves braided into shapes that pretended to be muscle. Its smile twitched, jerking wider in tiny pulses, as if stretched by invisible hands. Its eyes, my eyes, gleamed with a hunger I'd never felt before. A splash sounded behind me, the mud erupting. I froze. Something was rising. Not a person, not an animal. Something shaped like a memory the earth had been trying to bury for centuries. A thick column surged from the ground, drenched in pitch-black muck. Then another, and another. 3 pillars of earth and root, twisting upward, like the legs of an impossible creature dragging itself toward the surface. My terror clung to my ribs, rattling them. The forest didn't just create my copy. It harvested it, tested it, used it. And whatever climbed behind me was meant to finish what the imitation had failed to do. The creature, my made-from-mud reflection, tilted its head. Rainwater dripped from its hair, though the sky had long stopped pouring. A slow wheeze escaped its throat, thick and scratchy, like it was trying to laugh, but didn't know how. "Don't run," it gurgled. The words cracked apart inside its mouth, slurred, swollen. A command it didn't understand, repeating what the forest had whispered. But I ran anyway. I don't remember making the decision. My body simply snapped into motion. I bolted toward the narrow gap between 2 leaning trees, hoping to slip through them before the forest thought to close its ribs around me. The trunks shuddered as I lunged forward, their branches skimming the air beside my head. But I squeezed through just before they clamped together, like jaws. I stumbled down a slope, slick with rotting leaves, sliding more than running. My palms tore open on jagged stones. The taste of iron filled my throat. My breath sawed in and out in ragged bursts. Behind me, the creature shrieked, a sound stretched thin, like fabric ripping underwater. Not a scream of pain, a scream of frustration. I crashed through a wall of reeds, thorns snagging my legs, and found myself in a narrow ravine. The air here was colder, sharper, as if the forest hadn't breathed in this place for years. Above, the canopy split open, just enough to reveal a strip of sky, the color of dying embers. I didn't stop. Couldn't. Roots curled across the ground, like fingers trying to trip me. Vines swung down, as if reaching to reel me back. The forest was shifting its bones, slowly, deliberately, reorienting itself to guide me back toward the clearing. But then, I saw it. A narrow shape between two jutting rocks. Not a natural path. A break. A wound. Light seeped from it. Thin, pale light. The kind that doesn't feel warm, but feels true. Like something the forest couldn't quite corrupt. I threw myself toward it, lungs burning, legs shaking. Branches scraped along my back, grabbing at my jacket, tearing small pieces away, as if trying to reclaim the fabric. The creature's footsteps sloshed behind me, fast, frantic, unsteady. It didn't shout now. It didn't call my name. It just chased, like a starving animal, chasing a heartbeat. It recognized as its twin. I reached the break between the rocks. The light flared, white and sharp. I didn't know if it was safe. I didn't care. I hurled myself through the gap. My shoulder cracked painfully against stone. My knees buckled. The world tilted. And then, silence. Real silence. Cold and empty and without breath. When I lifted my head, the forest behind the rocks had vanished. Not faded. Vanished. As if the stones themselves held a border the forest couldn't cross. Only open land stretched ahead, sprinkled with patches of wild grass trembling in the breeze. The first breeze I'd felt in hours. My body gave out. I collapsed to the ground. Mud streaked on my skin like bruises. The rocks hummed faintly behind me, as though holding back a beast that clawed against their surface. For a moment, I thought I'd escaped. I let myself believe it. My heartbeat slowed. My breath steadied. But then, a sound rose from the other side of the stones. Soft, muffled. A voice. My voice. Sally. Drawn out, trembling, dripping with longing, but quieter now, as if speaking from inside a deep well. The rocks trembled once, then stilled. The forest didn't chase any farther. It didn't need to, because the last thing I saw before I staggered to my feet The last thing that nearly made my knees buckle was my own muddy hand pressed against the stone from the other side, leaving a perfect print, as though the creature had just laid its palm there, as though it had marked me, claimed me. And the print, it wasn't fading, it was soaking in, like the stone was swallowing it, memorizing it. The forest knew me now, not just my scent, not just my shape. It had learned my pulse, my breath, my voice, my fear. Trees remember. So does earth. And it had made a version of me once. It could make another. As I limped toward the open fields, the sky breaking into dawn above me, one truth settled in my bones like a slow-moving poison. I didn't escape. Not really. I was released. Because the forest doesn't chase its prey. It lets them run, so they can lead it someplace new. And somewhere behind me, deep in the dark of those ancient pines, another voice rose. Not mine, not the creature's. A voice as old as roots, whispering a promise that froze the blood in my veins. We will follow.